What is the bounce on a wedge and how can you use it properly to improve your chipping? Today we're going to be meeting up with PGA professional Jack Backhouse to find out. What actually is the bounce on the golf club? Like, how can people identify where it is?
So the bounce is the difference in angle between the leading edge of the club and the sole. This wedge has got 8 degrees of bounce, which is sort of like a mid bounce. Your wedge will generally say what bounce it has on there, so you can get wedges with like 12 degrees, which are more for people who are quite steep into the ball or play on fairly soft courses. Or there's wedges with like 4 degrees, which is very low for much more shallow players or people playing on really firm courses.
So the mistake people make when they're chipping is they use the leading edge too much, which means it's quite hard to actually use the loft of the golf club. Why would we want to use the bounce instead? Like, what's the advantage of that?
We want to use the bounce because what it allows us to do is, it means our contact doesn't have to be perfect. The problem with using the leading edge is, if you're playing soft turf particularly, the club will dig and your strike has to be absolutely nailed on, otherwise you're going to hit loads of bad shots. So we want to use the bounce because it allows the club to skid on the turf, not dig too deep into the ground, and get more of your shots on the green. It just gives you a bigger margin for error, so you don't have to be so precise with your contact.
I think it's worth noting on that, like, having a wedge with more bounce is often quite forgiving. So for a higher handicap, it's almost worth going for something with a bit more bounce. It's going to help you out more, because I think sometimes people think you have to have a low bounce club, which absolutely isn't like. Correct.
Oh yeah, I think what people see on the PGA Tour, like Luke Donald, for example, who's a great wedge player, plays a really low bounce, certainly in his lob wedge. His technique is great. They're always playing on perfect courses. They've got great lies everywhere. And that just isn't the reality of us sort of average golfers. Playing a bit more bounce just gives you a little bit more of a margin for error. So when you're in a scruffy lie, you can still get the club sliding under the ball rather than just digging straight down, or the reaction to digging straight down is standing up and knifing it, which is just as bad, really.
So how would someone go about kind of maybe changing their setup or getting it right to actually enable them to use the bounce properly?
Something that people do all the time, I see this in like 99% of chipping lessons, is people have the idea that they need the ball back and the hands forward, but what that does is takes away all the bounce, and unless you then have perfect contact, you're going to have a lot of shots where you dump it into the ground and it sticks, or you don't want to dump it in the ground and you pull up and you thin it. We have to set up in a way that allows us to use the bounce. So the first thing I do is I raise my hands up. So I try to feel like the toe of the club is down, the heel's up, and my hands are much more upright. Like, my checkpoint is the shaft sort of pointing above my belt line. And what that does is, it's easier to get the club skidding along the grass and using the bounce when it's toe down rather than heel down. The next thing I'll do is I won't have the ball back. I move the ball sort of very central, or even maybe slightly towards the front foot. Again, we're trying to sort of think about gliding the club along the turf, not digging down. So moving the ball forward will shallow us out a little bit. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll just sort of slightly open the face, because again, it just gives us a little bit more bounce. So when I've got the toe down, the face slightly open and the ball forwards, now all I'm trying to do is sort of swing back and get the club hitting the ground. I'm trying to use the ground as much as possible and slide the club under the ball.
So lots of people, instead of using the loft and the bounce, try to kind of force where the shot's going with like their wrists and the hands. How can you get away from that, doing that?
Something that I look for, or a really easy way to think about this is, I think, well, what we do know is the club has to pass the hands at the bottom in order for the club to sort of skid and keep that club moving along the turf. Something I try to feel like I'm doing is, I almost want that shaft pointing at my stomach for the whole swing, and I don't want at any point for my hands to be dragging ahead, because that's going to sharpen the leading edge into the ground. We want that club head, the shaft, pointing up at us throughout the whole swing. And that's going to keep the arc nice and wide, nice and shallow, and allow us to slide under the ball.
You can see from like front on how you get that visual arc when you're doing that. When you're doing this, the kind of club kind of sticks and then it just creates a line rather than that like nice arc.
I think you're trying to imagine that we want almost the club moving along the ground for as long as possible. Like I say, the ground is our friend. We want to hit the ground, or we have to hit the ground if we're going to use the bounce. When people are doing sort of the ball back hands forward stab technique, the club's moving down very sharply, and you're either going to dump it in, or sort of to avoid that one, you're going to jump out of it and then probably knife it.
Because I think what people don't realise is if they think this technique's safe, but actually if you're going down like that, you've only kind of got one precise point where you're making contact. Whereas if you've got that arc, you have a bit of leeway in terms of perfectness, because the club's actually near the ground for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I think it's something like you've got a 4-inch sort of low point where the ball could be anywhere on that, in that 4 inches, and you still hit an okay shot. Where I think it sort of makes logical sense to some people to have the ball back and the hands forward, because they're trying to make ball contact, and I get that. But what we're trying to do really is just, our main aim is just get the ball on the green every time. You know, we've missed the green, let's just get it on, give ourselves a look at a putt or 2-putt and move away and just get away. Our first job is just get the ball on the green every time. So if that was your target, all of a sudden it's much easier, isn't it? You know, we're not desperately trying to get it to sort of 3 feet, we're just get it on the green every time. It becomes a lot more of a simple job, so it doesn't have to be perfect anymore. It's just sort of slide the club under the ball, let the club head pass under the ball, keep that shaft pointing up at yourself, and you'll hit loads more good shots.
I think this gives you the opportunity to hit that higher shot easier as well, because you're actually doing the loft, like using the loft of the club, rather than just, if you're digging down, you're shutting the face and just de-lofting it. So you're always going to get that low shot. So with this, you've got that versatility, and then, yeah, if suddenly you do need to hit a really low shot, maybe we will move it back and hit down on it, but we shouldn't necessarily be doing that all the time.
Absolutely not. I think if you've got the ball back in your hands forward and you're trying to hit it low, then you're probably just using the wrong club. You know, you've got 13 other clubs in the bag with less loft that are going to go lower, and it's going to be easier to play. I think you've got to try and have the biggest margin for error, because we all make mistakes and we all make bad swings. So if you can set up in a way that just gives us a better chance of getting the ball on the green every time, then you're not going to have those stupid doubles.